The notary's office on Stephen Avenue smelled of old paper and finality. Audra Sinclair pressed the pen to the signature line and felt nothing, or tried to. 7 years of a life built together, condensed into a stack of legal pages, and Roman Veltri hadn't looked up from his phone since they entered the room. He sat across the mahogany table in a suit she had picked out for him 3 Christmases ago, jaw set, eyes somewhere on his screen. Efficient, unbothered, already elsewhere. "Take your time," her lawyer murmured beside her. Roman's counsel cleared his throat. The polite version of "hurry up." Audra looked down at the page. She was 5 months pregnant. The waistband of her slacks pressed against the small, firm curve of her belly, and she had loosened it that morning in the parking garage because nothing fit properly anymore. Nobody in that room seemed to notice or care. She signed her name, Audra Marie Sinclair. The letters looked thin and strange to her, like something written by someone she used to be. Roman pocketed his phone and stood before the ink was dry. "I'll have the storage unit cleared by the end of the month," he said. Not unkindly, which somehow made it worse. The way you'd talk about returning a library book. The door clicked shut behind him. Outside, Calgary was overcast and gray, the kind of February sky that sits on your chest. Audra walked down Stephen Avenue with her coat unbuttoned, because it no longer closed across her middle, and the cold bit at her collarbone. She didn't call anyone. She just walked until her ankles ached, and the wind off the Bow River pushed her toward a bus shelter, and she sat down on the cold plastic bench and stared at the mountains in the distance. Those permanent, indifferent peaks. They didn't care that her marriage had ended at 11:14 on a Tuesday morning. Neither did the city. She had given Roman 7 years. 7 years of early mornings and late nights, of attending his investors' dinners and smiling at people she didn't particularly like, of deferring her own firm so she could support his. She had been the quiet engine behind Veltri Development, while Roman was the face of it. She knew every blueprint, every permit, every relationship that had built that company. And now she was going home to a 2-bedroom apartment in Kensington that her sister had helped her move into the week before. The engagement announcement came 6 days later. It appeared on Roman Veltri's Instagram at 9:47 on a Sunday morning. He was photographed on a rooftop in Banff, arm around Kayla Montes, a fitness influencer with 300,000 followers and a brand called KM Active. Diamond catching the mountain light. The caption read, "New chapter, grateful." The comments were ecstatic. Dozens of his business contacts sent congratulations. A journalist from the Calgary Herald called it the year's most unexpected pairing. Audra's phone lit up with messages from people who hadn't spoken to her in months, who suddenly wanted to know if she was okay. She turned the phone face down and made herself tea she didn't drink. Her older sister, Tamsin Burrows, arrived at her door that evening with Indian takeout and a look on her face that said she had already seen it and was already furious on Audra's behalf. Tamsin was a criminal defense lawyer who wore her anger like good armor, righteous and controlled. She put the containers on the kitchen counter and said, "He announced it on a Sunday, deliberately so the story would cycle all week." "I know," Audra said. "He's doing it to establish a narrative before the Meridian Group acquisition closes." "I know that too." Tamsin sat across from her and looked at her with the directness only older sisters are permitted. "You need to get ahead of this, legally, before he does." "I can't afford a war, Tam." "You can't afford not to." She pushed a container across the table. "Eat something. You're keeping 2 people alive." Audra looked down at the ultrasound photo she'd left on the table that morning. She had been to the clinic alone 3 days prior. She hadn't told anyone yet. Not Tamsin, not their mother. The sonographer had moved the wand across her belly and tilted her head and said, in that careful, deliberate way medical people deliver large information, "Miss Sinclair, did anyone mention the possibility of twins?" She had not cried in the clinic. She had said, "No," very quietly, and then looked at the screen where 2 small heartbeats flickered like candle flames in a draft. She had thought, with a clarity that frightened her, "I have to figure something out." Now she slid the photo across the table. Tamsin went still. She picked it up, set it down carefully. "Twins," she said. "Twin girls." Audra wrapped her hands around her mug. Roman doesn't know. The silence stretched. Outside, a snowplow groaned down the street. He will eventually, Tamsin said. I know, but not yet. She started working from home, freelance drafting contracts from her old architecture contacts, rewriting structural proposals, anything that paid something. Her former firm had gently suggested she take her leave early. Her body was changing faster than she'd expected. Swollen feet by noon, a backache that woke her at 3 in the morning, blood pressure that crept upward each week. The doctor spoke to her in a tone that meant slow down, and she nodded and went home and opened her laptop again, because rent was not going to slow down with her. She was editing a load-bearing report one afternoon when an email arrived from Bastion Development Group, a boutique sustainable development firm. She had submitted her portfolio 2 weeks earlier, before the divorce, when she'd still been imagining a different kind of future. The message was brief and professional. They had reviewed her work on the Rito District mixed-use project. Could she come in for a conversation? She almost deleted it. She was 7 months pregnant by then, moving carefully, sleeping badly. But she went, because some part of her still refused to stop. The Bastion offices occupied the top 2 floors of a building on 8th Avenue. Clean lines, exposed timber, the kind of space that meant the people inside took their craft seriously. The receptionist offered her water without being asked and adjusted the chair before she sat. Small kindnesses. She noticed them because she had stopped expecting them. Emery Bastien came out of a corner office in a charcoal sweater and reading glasses he hadn't bothered to remove. He was perhaps 45, quiet in the way that genuinely confident men sometimes are. No performance of importance, no desk theater. He shook her hand and said, "Your Rito drawings are some of the most intelligent, load-bearing work I've seen in years. Thank you for sending them." She hadn't expected that to land so hard. She managed, "Thank you for reading them." They spoke for an hour about engineering philosophy, not about her condition, not about her personal circumstances, not about the tabloid item from the week before. Kayla Montes had posted an Instagram story wearing Roman's blazer in what was unmistakably Audra's former living room, and it had circulated long enough to be embarrassing. Emery either didn't know or chose not to acknowledge it. She was grateful either way. He offered her a consulting contract on 2 projects, flexible hours, remote where possible. "We can structure it however makes sense for you," he said, without explaining what for you referred to. She took the contract. 3 weeks later, her blood pressure spiked at a routine appointment, and she was admitted to Foothills Hospital before she had time to call anyone. She lay on the examination table, listening to 2 heartbeats on the fetal monitor while a nurse called it an early warning, and she thought with a clarity that frightened her. There is no one to call right now who can actually help. The next morning, there was a message on her phone from an unfamiliar number. "The Bastion HR office mentioned you had a hospital appointment yesterday. I hope everything is all right. Let me know if there's anything you need. EB." She stared at it for a long time. Then she typed, "I'm fine, thank you." A pause then. "My wife was admitted here 4 years ago. I still know which floor has the best coffee. 2nd floor north wing if you need it." She found herself crying. Not out of sadness exactly, but because she had been so tightly wound for so long that a small, specific kindness from an unexpected source was enough to loosen something she hadn't known she was holding. The twins arrived 6 weeks early, on a night when sleet was turning Stephen Avenue to glass, and Audra had been alone in her apartment baking bread she didn't particularly need, because the baking was something to do with her hands. Tamsin drove her to the hospital at 2:30 in the morning, white-knuckling the icy steering wheel, talking the whole way about nothing in particular, to keep Audra from thinking too hard. The delivery suite was bright and loud and very fast toward the end. When the nurses placed them, one at a time, wrapped and blinking, Audra held each daughter and felt the entire infrastructure of her fear shift. Not disappear. Reorganize itself around something more important than survival. They were small. They were complete. They looked up at her with the blind, serious attention of people who had arrived early to somewhere they fully intended to be. She named them Rowan and Blythe. Roman found out from a news alert. A local journalist had run a brief human interest piece on the Bastion Group partnership, and mentioned noted Calgary structural engineer Audra Sinclair, currently on maternity leave following the birth of twin daughters. His lawyer called Tamsin within 48 hours. He wanted to discuss visitation rights. Audra sat at her sister's kitchen table. She had been staying there since hospital discharge, and read the letter twice. Rowan was asleep in a bassinet 3 feet away. Blythe was being held by their mother, who had flown in from Victoria and was quietly furious in the way their mother expressed most strong emotions. "He has never once asked about them," Audra said. "Not when I was pregnant, not after the birth, not now, not until their names appeared in print." Tamsin was already on her laptop. "Then we're going to make sure the court knows exactly that." The letter from Roman's firm had arrived alongside something else. A settlement offer, sealed and cordially worded. In exchange for a non-disclosure agreement and her withdrawal from any public discussion of their marriage or his business dealings, he would provide a modest monthly support payment and cover 6 months of the girls' medical expenses. The number was not nothing. She looked at it for a long time. Then she thought about the emails she had quietly saved over the past 18 months. Roman's requests that she sign building permits in her name because his company's credit rating was under review. Contracts she had countersigned, believing him when he said it was temporary. The bank correspondence she'd found in a drawer, 3 weeks before he asked for the divorce. A construction loan of $400,000, registered in her name without her knowledge. She hadn't understood it then. Tamsin had understood it immediately. She tore the settlement letter in half. Then she called her sister. "I want to file," she said. "Full disclosure, all of it." Tamsin was quiet for exactly 1 second. "I'll call the Financial Crimes Unit first thing in the morning." Roman's lawyer called the next afternoon. Roman himself called the evening after that. The first time he had dialed her number since the day of their divorce. His voice was careful and measured. "You're making this bigger than it needs to be," he said. "You registered a $400,000 loan in my name without my consent," she said. "I didn't make it big. You did." "Audra. Don't call again unless it's through counsel." She hung up and sat in the dark for a while. Blythe was making small, sleeping sounds from the next room. The sleet ticked against the window like a clock. The custody hearing fell on a Thursday morning in March. The courtroom was small and functional. Nothing like the dramas she had imagined. Roman's legal team was expensive and polished. They spoke about his stable income, his new domestic situation, his commitment to responsible co-parenting. When Tamsin presented the financial documentation, the loan registered in Audra's name, the emails requesting her signature under false pretexts, a forensic accountant's report showing a pattern going back 4 years, the room changed temperature. Roman's counsel fumbled their response. When Audra took the stand, she spoke quietly and without theater. "He did not inquire about the pregnancy," she said. "He did not contact me after the birth. He did not call, visit, or acknowledge his daughter's existence until their names appeared in a trade publication. He is applying for access now because it serves a professional narrative, not a parental one. I am not preventing him from being their father. I am asking this court to see clearly who is making that choice." The judge looked at Roman over his glasses for a long moment. The custody petition was denied. The financial fraud matter was referred for regulatory review. Outside the courthouse on a gray March afternoon, 2 local reporters waited on the steps. One asked if she cared to respond to Roman Veltri's statement describing the proceedings as weaponized. Audra paused. "I didn't weaponize anything," she said. "I stopped quietly absorbing the cost of someone else's choices." That clip ran on the regional broadcast that evening. By morning, it had been shared several thousand times. Emery Bastian sent her a text. "Saw the news. Glad the court made the right call. Your project designs are on my desk, whenever you're ready." She smiled at her phone in a way she hadn't in a long time. She went back to work in April. Slowly at first, 2 days a week, while her mother stayed with the girls. The Bastian offices had quietly arranged a private workspace for her. No announcement, no ceremony. She came in on a Tuesday morning and found her drafting table set up beside a window with a view of the river valley. There was a good coffee on the desk and a note in spare, angular handwriting. "Welcome back. E." She and Emery began talking the way people who share a professional language start talking. About load-bearing principles, about the philosophy of building things that last. He had lost his wife to cancer 3 years prior. He didn't speak of it often, but when he did, he spoke plainly. He had 2 grown stepchildren he was close to. He had a house in Inglewood he'd been renovating for 4 years, because he kept second-guessing the structural plans. "You need a good engineer," she said one afternoon, only half joking. He looked at her sideways. "I'm aware." Summer arrived in Calgary the way it always does, suddenly, brilliantly, as if apologizing for the winter. Audra moved into a proper apartment on the edge of Sunnyside, large enough for the girls, bright enough for her. She painted the living room herself on a Saturday while her mother watched Rowan and Blythe, and she stood in the middle of the half-painted room with a roller in her hand and understood, for the first time, that she was not rebuilding her old life. She was building a different one from scratch, on a foundation she had chosen herself. Emery asked her to dinner in September. He did it directly, without preamble, standing in the doorway of her office with his hands in his jacket pockets. "Not a work dinner," he said. "I want to be clear about that." She studied him a moment. "I come with considerable complications." "I know. 2 small ones, specifically." "I know that too." He didn't look away. "I'm not asking about complications. I'm asking if you'd like to have dinner." She said yes. The Apiga Centennial Gala in November was the largest event in the Alberta engineering calendar, held at the TELUS Convention Center with its panoramic view of the winter skyline. It was the first formal occasion Audra had attended since the divorce. She wore a deep emerald dress and arrived with Tamsin, who wore red and had the kind of posture that made people instinctively move out of her way. Roman Veltri was there. Of course he was. The engineering and construction worlds overlapped in this city, and he had always moved easily in these rooms. He was alone. Kayla Montes had reportedly ended things in October, citing a need to prioritize her own well-being, as announced in an Instagram story that had been quietly deleted a week later. Roman stood near the bar looking polished and slightly diminished, the way men do when the story has turned against them, and they haven't fully accepted it yet. He saw Audra across the room. She saw him see her. She did not look away. It was Emery who appeared at her side 20 minutes later, a glass in each hand, easy in the manner of a man who belongs wherever he finds himself. He handed her the sparkling water without comment. A colleague from a rival firm clapped him on the shoulder. He introduced Audra as the best structural mind currently working in this city, without qualifier or explanation, and the conversation moved on. Roman approached near the end of the evening. He looked at Emery first, then at her. "You look well," he said. "I am," she said. He had the look of a man about to deliver something rehearsed. "I heard the regulatory board is moving forward with the finance file." "That's correct." "Audra, He stopped. Something shifted in his expression, the polish giving way briefly to something more honest. "I didn't think it would go this far." She considered that for a moment. "No," she said. "I don't imagine you did." She turned back to Emery. Roman stood there one more second, then walked away. There was nothing more to say. That was perhaps the thing she hadn't anticipated, that the confrontation, when it finally came, would feel so small, not triumphant, not devastating, just finished. They were married the following spring on a Saturday afternoon at Emery's finally completed house in Inglewood. The renovation done at last, the light coming through the windows exactly as she had drawn it. The backyard held 12 people. Tamsin and her partner, Audra's mother, Emery's stepdaughter and her husband, a handful of close colleagues. Rowan and Blythe, 14 months old, sat in a double stroller attended by Emery's stepdaughter, wearing matching white rompers they would destroy within the hour. When the officiant asked Emery if he had anything to add, he looked at Audra and said simply, "You showed me what it looks like when someone refuses to be diminished. I want to spend the rest of my life standing next to that." She didn't manage a response. He knew what her silence meant. The Financial Crimes Unit concluded its review in August. Roman Veltri's first firm was assessed a penalty of $700,000. He resigned as CEO 6 weeks later. The announcement was brief. Audra read it on her phone while nursing Blythe on the back deck on a warm evening, the mountains faint and blue on the western horizon, and she felt, not vindicated exactly, more like, there it is, a long equation finally balanced. She opened her own firm in October. Sinclair Structural, 3 employees, a second-floor office in Bridgeland, with a view she liked. She took on 2 municipal contracts and a heritage restoration project in the Beltline she had been quietly wanting for years. Tamsin brought champagne on the first morning. Her mother sent flowers. Emery came by at noon with lunch and stood in the middle of the empty office, looking at her carefully. "Is this what you wanted?" he asked. She looked around the room, clean walls, good light, her name on the door. Through the window, Calgary stretched across the valley floor, familiar and complicated and entirely hers. "Not everything," she said, "but enough to build from." On the twins' second birthday, they had a small party in the Inglewood backyard, balloons in pink and yellow, a cake with 2 candles that Rowan and Blythe regarded with intense suspicion before being guided, gently, to blow them out. Their grandmother chased them across the grass with a camera. Tamsin sat on the back step with a glass of wine and the satisfied expression of someone whose predictions have all come correct. Audra stood at the edge of the garden, watching Emery crouch down to Blythe's level and make a face that produced a shriek of laughter so loud it startled the neighbor's dog. She thought about the room on Stephen Avenue, the thin ink of her signature, the cold that had gotten into her bones that February morning and stayed for a long time afterward. It was gone now. Not because someone had rescued her from it, but because she had worked, steadily and without fanfare, through the long middle of the hardest years, and on the other side there was a backyard and 2 daughters and a man who introduced her as the best in the city, and a firm with her name on the door. She had not won by making Roman Veltri suffer. She had won by building something he would never be invited into. Blythe toddled across the grass and crashed into her legs, grabbing 2 fistfuls of her skirt, looking up with Roman's eyes and her own stubborn mouth. And Audra lifted her daughter into her arms and held her in the warm afternoon light and thought, "This is what I was building toward, all along. I just couldn't see the blueprints yet."